have one item on our agenda this evening, and that is the proposed 2014 budget and capital improvement plan. And our city manager, Heather Johnston, is going to kick us off and then introduce our staff, who's going to be giving the presentation.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I won't take much of your time. This is your 7th meeting on the budget, and so I want to make sure that that we get right into it.
In 5 months.
Exactly. So Ms. Stry, our finance director, Kelly Stry, is going to kick us off, and then we have Terry Schultz and Steve Albrecht are both going to, our Public Works Director, Steve Albrecht, and our Parks and Natural Resources and Facilities Director, Terry Schultz, are going to talk about the CIP, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about our capital improvement program tonight as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Stry to get us started.
Okay. And I think we're going to pull up the PowerPoint, please.
It's working.
All right. It's working up, okay, it's not up here, but
There we go.
here it comes.
Maybe not.
Okay. Well, we'll go
Yeah,
with,
it's here.
All right.
For them. It's just,
There we go. I can, oh, no, you. Take it down there.
And the other monitor isn't working.
The other monitor isn't working, but okay, so we will, that's all right, I think I can tell which one you're on in front of me there. The first slide is just a recap of the budget process of where we've been. There we go, there's the slide. Where we've been over the course of the year, and that brings us down to November. So we started out in June discussing the high level where projections that we had, our 5-year financial plans, and then we had a work session on debt planning. We talked about the maximum tax levy. You set the maximum tax levy in September. In October, we had our video released, and you heard from all of the different departments about their individual departments and budgets. Last work session, which was 2 weeks ago, we talked about the general fund and other property tax supported funds, so our special revenue funds, talked at length about the property tax. Tonight's session will focus on capital improvement project, which Mr. Albrecht and Mr. Schultz will talk in depth on the particular items within there. And then we will move on to the capital project funds that all of that CIP flows into, and the enterprise funds. So with that, then the final meeting that you'll have will be in a week at your regular council session. And that is where you will adopt the levy and the budget for 2014. So we started out in June estimating that we would have a 6.9% increase in the tax levy. In September, you approved that the maximum increase would be 5.7%. And now the proposed budget that you're considering is 5.4%. And important part of that to remember is that 4% of that, so the majority of that increase, will go to our ITF levy and is really capturing of the valuation that was in TIF 2 that is decertifying at the end of this year to put it into our capital projects funds for street improvements. The remaining 1.4% is for current services, and of that, 0.5% is paid by existing property owners, and the balance is paid by new construction within the city of Burnsville. So that's how that's what makes up that percentage increase in the tax levy that we're proposing. Something else notable in those numbers, the legislature did change our exemption from sales tax for cities in this coming year, 2014. We are anticipating that will save us $285,000 over all funds, and that has been incorporated into the budget, and $175,000 of that is in the general fund. So that is going to offset our increases in other current expenditures. And as I alluded to earlier, the focus of last meeting was the general fund, special revenue funds, tax increment financing. and a general overview. Tonight's meeting is the capital improvements program, capital project funds, enterprise funds, and debt service funds, and also a few changes to the financial management policies that were in your budget workbook. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Albrecht.
Thank you, Kelly. What we're going to take you through tonight is we're going to talk about the 5-year CIP planning document. And I think the important thing for the council to remember is even though we give you a window of 5 years, we're really 15 to 20 years out on all of our planning. And as we talk about some of the rates and fund balances later and why we feel like we can operate at those minimum balances and flatten rates out, it's really because we're able to project out significant distance in the future about what our expenses are going to be. Part of that is the city's asset system, and the other big part of that is the city's finance system. The technology this council's invested in give us the tools to be able to do those things, which allow us to run things a little bit leaner, I think, on the CIP end of things. So with that, I'll just go through. We're going to talk street projects, collector thoroughfare, intersection improvements, our streetlight system, water system, sanitary sewer system, and stormwater management. Those will be the primary ones, and then we'll also talk about the parks, vehicles and equipment and facilities, information technology, and then our facilities, the big ones, Ice Center, the golf course, and then the PAC. And we will really highlight 2014, because that's our primary planning year, the year that's for the most part locked in. As you get farther out in the plan, things become a little more fluid, but we will touch on big projects in the 5-year plan to bring to your attention. And as always, any questions, please stop me and we'll go through those. So, with that, we'd like to jump into streets and utilities CIP. Over the 5-year period, about almost $80 million investment by the city, $16.9 million in 2014. And just touching on that CIP over that period of time, you can streets and street maintenance dominate our CIP for the most part. Now, one thing that's a little deceiving on the utilities end is we show utilities, and we'll show you in a few minutes a slide that shows within the street project there's also a utility expenditure for stormwater and sewer and water also. But this gives you an idea of kind of the annualized expenditures. One reason things kick up a little bit in 2015, you'll see that large thoroughfare and collector project in there, the grayish bar. That is the Cliff Road interchange project across the old Knox property. That's a significant thoroughfare project for the city, which you see in the other years we don't have significant non-city street projects. We have some intersections and things, but nothing of that nature.
Mr. Albrecht, that particular thoroughfare and collector, that's a county road, but we have a contribution to that.
Well, this will be
reflecting.
The new project will be a city street. So the county road actually ends at the 35W ramp, and then we'll have a new extension of Cliff Road through to the west, not our full long-term extension, which is the bridge over but the portion that would go to DuPont 126 area, and so that'll be the first extension. So basically, the area that's the mulch storage yard now, we'll have a new road that Cliff will run straight through instead of bending up onto the ramp. It would run through, and we'll have an intersection where the ramp comes down to Cliff, a controlled intersection, which will allow us to, number one, allow traffic to flow in and out of the MRQ area better. Right now, you cannot get out of the MRQ at certain parts of the day because the traffic coming off the ramp dominates that, and there isn't enough turn lanes to allow free-flowing traffic onto the ramp from the MRQ area.
Okay. So the county's Cliff Road just goes up to 35.
Correct. Then it becomes a non-county
everything
road.
on the MRQ is all our streets.
That would be city, yes. The same with the new bridge at 13 and 5.
Because
everything north of 13 is
they
now going
turned
to be
that
city
back to
street.
us.
So that's correct.
Okay, because they turned all of that. Okay.
Okay, so we'll keep moving. We'll dive into streets first. Showing the council what our street expenditures over the next 5 years are. We're looking at almost $56 million over the 5-year period. The recon and rehab projects definitely dominate things, although you'll notice our overlay project next year, that is the $1.8 million neighborhood overlay project, where we're going to tackle about that roughly 10 miles of neighborhood streets experiencing those failing pavements. So that's the one big difference you'll see next year. And then you'll see a little bit of overlay project every year. That's a program that we will continue. And what the goal with that is to get to a point where we're doing that preventive overlay maintenance and extending the lives of our streets. We start it next year in earnest, and then we scale it back to something that's an annual project there. And then you can see highlighted out the Cliff 35W ramp of $4.7 million next year there. If we go within the funding sources of the projects, and this is what I mentioned before, because we forget when we want to do road projects, there's things attached to road projects that we don't think about from a funding source. You can see that with our road projects, there's a significant contribution almost every year from our utility funds, meaning water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater. And so that's a challenge to keep water rates where we want them to be and still replace that infrastructure when we're being aggressive with a street program. And so for the most part, you'll see a pretty consistent utility contribution with the exception of 2017, and then 2018 is a little smaller too. That's the year that we need to divert those utility resources to the water treatment plant, which we'll talk about when we get to the utility side. We've got a 35-year-old water plant that needs some renovations that'll be done. And so that's why it drops down. But what you will see with this over time, as we get caught up with our water main replacement, that portion of utility specifically will drop because the majority of it is water main replacement, and within 10, 12 years, we will not have to do such invasive water main replacement with our reconstruction project, and that'll set the city up, number one, to start looking at being able to reduce any bonding that's going on in the water department, and then also get the utility rates to be able to flatten out and minimize those increases. And so that's kind of the light at the end of the tunnel on the utility side, is get our streets in a shape where we're not having to dig up water mains every time we redo a street and get caught up. And part of the issue for the city is the cast iron water mains that we used in the 50s and 60s are not a great product. They've shown over time. And then, unfortunately for the city of Burnsville, we moved to concrete water main in the 70s, which had about a 10-year run before they decided that was the wrong type of material to use. And so we've got a period of time that we need to get to modern water main, which is the ductile iron water main. And once we get there, though, it will help take some of the pressure off our utility fund.
How many miles do we have left for us to get to
we have
replacement?
As I said, 10 years, so we've got 30, 40 miles of water main still that need to be replaced as part of those recon projects. So.
Okay. And I think that's what we really have to be thinking about, is that replacement cost.
Yep.
Because we did have that kind of discussion in 1996 and 97, and when we were having backups, a lot of backups and failures, and we have to really make sure that we do all of that replacement.
The other thing that will help us is technology is coming along. There will be a day here within 10 years where we don't dig streets up for water main repair anymore, that we do it the same way we do sewer repairs. We line the water mains. That technology is here. It's not quite there yet. It's a little more challenging because it's a pressurized system. So you have water services and things, but it's a matter of time before we're able to do that, and that will help the city also because we won't any longer have to dig those up to replace them. We'll be able to do that remotely like we do our sewers.
Steve, when we get to replacing our water delivery system, are we going to be then in compliance with the new rules that are coming out from the feds?
We're in compliance right now with the water system itself.
Yeah.
Our issues with our water are related to failures and the quality of the pipe.
Okay.
Not anything from we don't have any of the types of pipes that there's any issues with contaminants and things of that nature.
Okay, good. We don't have any.
We don't have any of those issues. We have
really
pipes that are wearing out as our issue prematurely because of the materials they were built with.
Okay,
So.
great.
Just to touch on the 2014 projects, we've got our annual street rehabilitation, which is essentially that overlay of those collector type streets. We've got our street reconstruction program, which is a very large neighborhood area next year that we'll be tackling. And then we've got those maintenance overlays. Now that's our overlay program that will be tackling that 10 miles roughly of streets that are having premature failing. The other piece that's in there just in the plan is the HOC parking deck expansion. We have a half-deck expansion programmed in the fund because we have those funds available right now for that. We are in the process of working to obtain more funds for that, and if we can, we would like to do a full deck. That's the best bang for the buck on that project in conjunction with the hotel expansion. But we do have the funding in place for the half expansion right now, and that's why that's shown in the CIP. Collector thoroughfare continued. Next year we will do some planning and finish up our preliminary design for the Cliff Road extension, 35W ramp project, and then you can see the large project starts in 2015. Part of that is timing too. We want 13 and 5 to be done, and we want it to be up and operational before we do anything at the other end of the MRQ. Obviously, that would have significant impacts on the property owners and businesses in that area. We also have some trail extensions on county roads, and then next summer, Excel funding is finally for us to turn back. Now, that $500,000 represents Excel's contribution, which is about $350,000. Contribution, which is capped at $150,000 for the turnback of 3+ miles of that roadway. So that's going to help us long term with our pavement too, as we won't have to reconstruct and rebuild that roadway in the future. So, and then intersection improvements, we don't have any proposed in 2014. We have a year or two to 2015 before we start our investment there. And actually, what we'll be doing in 2015 is we're paying the county back. They've done 3 signals for us over the last 2 years, 2 of them on County Road 42 and 1 at Nicollet and McAndrews. They are letting us have a couple of years because they didn't give us much lead time on our contribution, like a year, and so they understood that that was a short term, so they fronted the money on those projects, and we start paying those back in 2015, and then we start also mixing in some city signal repairs. And we've got a big one at Burnsville Parkway and County Road 5. That signal is in dire need, and that'll be in the 2015-2016 range. So.
Dan?
Well, just hearing dire need, 2015, 2016, that almost clashes. Dire would be more
just from a maintenance standpoint.
It needs to be done in the next 12 months, 6 to 12 months. But dire for us in long-term planning sense is a couple of years out. That's correct. The most closest proximity.
It's a maintenance issue. It's not a functional issue, but if you've seen the signal, it's rust-colored is what we would call that signal, and so it's in need of updating. It also doesn't have any of the current ADA compliant equipment on it, and so it's something. We also have to look at the geometry there. It's kind of a tough intersection anyway, the way that it's laid out. So we're going to time that with a county overlay project and then potentially some city repairs to Burnsville Parkway at the same time.
Oh, good efficiencies.
The other things we wanted to touch on in our street program in the CIP, we do have this unprogrammed category of projects. And just reminding the council, we're monitoring both of the bridges over 35W, the one at Burnsville Parkway and the one on 13. Those decorative elements that we have are rusting and are starting to fall apart a little bit, but we're monitoring those. We will have to remove them at some point in the future. And as the council will recall, our long-term plan was the ones that were on 35 and 13, we'll remove those permanently. There isn't as much demand. They're in an area where people just don't even notice that they're there. But the ones at 13 or at 35 and Burnsville Parkway, we would actually take those off, refurbish them, and put them back up, or look at new if it's cheaper, whichever way that ends up. We don't want to do that before we have to do it, so we're kind of rolling that. We check them every year. If they look good, we wait a year, but that's not programmed. And the combined cost of those two is about $500,000 that we don't have a funding source for, and so that would be a fund balance type use in the future. But again, we're going to push those out as far as we can. There's no reason to prematurely replace them just because they're rusty. We want to make sure they don't fall. That's really the important thing, and they're safe right now. The other item that has not been in our CIP for a couple of years are the pedestrian overpasses on Highway 13.
Yes.
There had for years been proposed to look at a pedestrian overpass at Nicollet in 13 and Diffley in 13. And so those are each in the neighborhood of $1 to $1.5 million apiece. And so we haven't included them in the CIP, and the main reason for that is the city would have to, even if we were to get some federal funding for those, we still would have to match that in the neighborhood of maybe up to $500,000 per bridge, and so we would need to have some local funding identified. And so we did want to have a brief discussion about whether that's something the council wants us to look at next year to maybe include in the 2015 CIP and on. And just to give you some statistics there, I talked about the cost. From a pedestrian use standpoint, the Nicollet area, we did pedestrian counts out there, so we know what on busy days. We see about 60 pedestrians use the Nicollet 13 crossing. As you're aware, that's a long crossing. There's probably would be more. It's a long distance to walk. That's not a high amount, although that amount will probably grow over time with the HOC and the transit center, and so we expect that amount's only going to continue to rise. Diffley's a little different situation. Diffley is primarily used when kids are going to school that aren't using the buses, because they do bus from that side of of 13. However, in conversations, I think the kids that have some before school or after school activities that don't line up with the bus routes are probably the ones that use that. We're seeing about 13 kids in the morning, 13 in the afternoon, so it is not a significant number, and it's probably not going to change much. It's probably going to be steady, that number. And so that's something the council would have to weigh, that expenditure of $1.5 million. Whether we would actually get federal funding for a bridge that only serves 13 pedestrians in the morning, afternoon is probably doubtful, to be honest. And so that's a little problematic. We'll have to maybe work on some other safety options at that location. But unless the pedestrian counts change, the city would probably have to fund the majority of that bridge versus Nicollet, where there's some things that are going to grow over time, and also the transit hub and some of the community grants that are out there would probably be applicable to that. So something that I wanted the council to think about. No decisions necessary tonight. It's not in our CIP, but I think it's something that we'll want some feedback from the council for next year in the CIP, and whether it's something we want to pursue, because the way the federal funding works is you have to be 4 or 5 years out on your proposals to get the dollars. And so we're going to want to know if it's something we want to go for. We kind of have to start applications. They're going to come out with another solicitation next year for those projects, 2018, 2019. We'd want to probably decide by then. And if the council wanted to, it's something we could consider for a work session early next year, too, to have a conversation about that.
And this was generated from the folks who live at Cedar Bridge and North River Hills because of their children who cross over to go to Metcalf. But from what our staff has indicated, there's only about 13 students going back and forth, and there is a bus. But I guess it's the concerns of the parents when you have kids crossing that busy highway.
But
It becomes a safety issue.
I'd like to see that on the work session, because one of the questions I have is, are there only 13 because the other parents are driving their kids
Yeah.
there? Would there be more? And I don't know. I mean, we
Yeah,
can
and I
talk
don't know
about
too,
that.
but I get emails
Yeah.
every year and constantly, and I've
Yes, I
sent
know
it off to
there's been
staff.
concerns about
Yeah.
that light. And so anyway, let's, if we can.
Yeah,
talk about
I think Steve has proposed something very good for us to take a look at. I do see a safety issue on Nicollet, because when I use that and I see kids crossing over, or in the morning when people are walking, especially in the wintertime, to go catch the bus, and it's dark.
It's a lot of lanes of traffic
Yeah.
to cross for anybody, and that's the issue. So what I would propose is we maybe schedule that for a springtime work session.
Yeah.
That would give staff the chance to work with the school district and maybe just do some a little bit of survey outreach to that area to find out, would you allow your kids to walk? Get a little bit of data for the council to consider what the options are there.
Yeah, for the 13 Diffley.
Yep.
Yeah, and then of course the Nicollet 13 is.
I think that would be easier
Yeah.
to project
Sure.
or imagine anyway.
Okay.
I know
Okay,
we've
yeah.
talked about the one at Nicollet
For years.
for years,
Yeah,
and it's
for years.
been a cost factor that
Yeah,
kept
that's
us from really proceeding
Yeah.
with it, but the need has existed for quite some time. So if we could find some federal matching funds and a few other things and put it on the CIP, discuss
Yeah.
putting it on the CIP, to me it's kind of it's an old issue.
It's an
It's a
old
need that
issue.
has been reoccurring every year that I think the $1.5 million cost has kept us from even really jumping
Yeah.
in, because I think from my perspective, I wasn't aware that there were some federal matching funds that might reduce it, but even looking at $500,000 is a big nut for us to.
And our staff has submitted applications for grant for every one of those years, but we just don't make it because we didn't put any money in. And I think that's where we fall short, but we have to identify matching funds for us to get over that hump.
It would allow us to talk to our consultants and figure out what does the city really need to bring to the table to score enough points to allow
Right.
this to be something that the federal government would consider.
Well,
So,
I agree with
Steve, are you on
Councilmember
tab?
Sherry. Let's do it.
I'm on TAC. I'm on the advisory committee. So
Because you'll see all of
Yep.
those applications going through. We're still trying to get somebody else to get on tap. Okay.
okay. Well, moving along, we'll jump into the utilities CIP. As I mentioned, there's a big part of utilities that's part of the street projects, but hitting on some of the big utility projects, 2014 will actually have the final $800,000 was part of the chlorine system upgrades that are ongoing right now. We'll be coming to the council month with the bid opening for installation of the equipment that you authorized purchase for earlier this year. And so that $800,000 is actually for the installation, which will occur in the early next year. Surface water treatment plant, we've got ongoing costs with that. Not significant, but we do have some ongoing costs. Every year we do well and PRV and then high service pump renovation, and so that's our standard program, that $470,000. And then we have some tower and reservoir rehab, which are ongoing maintenance of our 5 total towers and reservoirs combined. And then we've got the stores hydrant nozzle program, which continues in 2014 and on throughout the CIP. Any questions about any of those? The lift station rehabilitation projects, obviously our sanitary lift stations, those are on a cycle for rehabilitation. We have 14 of those stations. And then our sanitary sewer rehabilitation program, that's basically our lining program. And so that's where we want to be with water main someday, just ongoing. But when you look at the costs, you're doing $800,000, you're doing 5-6 neighborhoods for $800,000. It's amazing value that we get out of the lining program, and those pipes are better than they were the day they were constructed when that's done. So,
Steve, on the lift station, are we getting less complaints on the pressures?
On the lift stations, that would be the sewer lift stations, and that's not related to the PR. The PRVs would be the pressure.
Yeah.
The staff has a study that's ongoing that started this year in the MRQ area. The area that we have pressure issues is really the Minnesota River area, not just the MRQ, but areas east of.
Some of those businesses, and I've sent those to you because they've been complaining about the pressure.
So we're doing a pressure study in that area, and while it won't yield an immediate fix, what it'll allow us to do is when the MRQ does redevelop, it'll allow us to work with the planning department to incorporate whether it's a tower or some kind of reservoir down there. That's what's really missing in that area. We essentially use what are called pressure reduction valves to keep the pressure lower in that area. Problem is they can't open and close quick enough when there's big pressure spikes. The types of industries we have down there, they have high demand quickly. And so that causes issues, ripple effects to the whole area. And so we're working with our businesses down there. I think we have a plan in place to work with them. It's not the long-term fix. We have a short-term fix, and then we'll, in our long-range CIP, have some things for you. They won't show up in the 5-year that are long-term pressure repairs for that. So.
And they really appreciate your working with them.
Well, I think the big change is just the customer service, is making them understand we know there's an issue and working with them on it, and a little bit of Linda's staff just going and working with them, and if we have to pay to replace a small PRV or something at their business, it's worth a lot, I think, as the city's investment in that area. So.
Thank you. They're very appreciative of that, Steve. Thank you.
We'll go to the next slide. Our Stormwater Management annual capital program, we do our annual lateral drainage modifications. That's the ongoing program. Our pond cleanout program, which continues and will never go away with what we have to do federally. And then just hitting on some of the stormwater management, we do have stormwater lift stations also. We have 8 of those. We have a rather large one coming up in 2014. That's why you see the $950,000. The Cliff Road surface water intake, I would just touch on that for the council and the public. That's a stormwater improvement project to help protect our quarry intake area from potential runoff or drainage where we'd have a spill at the train area, the railroad tracks along that, or just on that roadway that runs along our quarry. So that's an improvement that we're going to do along there. Black Dog outfall, that's the pipes that run under the railroad tracks down at Black Dog Park. And so monitor those because we have a considerable amount of the city that actually runs through those pipes. And so that's more of a monitoring project, being ready if we have an issue. We do know we're going to have a long-term replacement in a few years for that. Crystal Beach Park Pond, we've got some significant improvements there for TMDLs and water quality that are going to be ongoing. And Terry's group is working on that stuff with Natural Resource Department. And then the MRQ in 2014 will buy the easements necessary for the center of the MRQ. The Yellow Freight Pond, or we refer to it as that, located on the Yellow Freight property, that's complete for the most part. We're going to have another one just to the east of J.B. O'Meara's property. There's an existing pond. It's a dry pond. We'll enhance that. And then with those 2 ponds, none of our redevelopment in that area will be required to put ponds on their site. So it allows them to develop the entire property, not have to tie up area with an individual small pond, which aren't functional and take up a lot of important space on properties.
And didn't we just approve all of that when we
Yep.
were doing some of the work?
Yep,
Because
and
that came through the...
And that was one of the things we talked about on the MRQ update. So, Stormwater Management, some of our future projects we're just highlighting. We've got Keller Lake Pond. That's another TMDL-related pond to get us to our water quality goals. Got ravine. We have some ravines in town that are seeing some erosion issues.
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, well, I saw that when I was reading the document. And could you talk a little bit more about that? That really surprised me. And is this on public land? Is it on park land?
Well, it's on both public and private property. And what we have is, as a River Bluff community, there are areas where the water runs down natural ravines. And what we're finding in some of those areas is we've got erosion that if we don't do some things to mitigate it, we're going to have both public and private property damage long term. And so our natural resource staff and our engineering staff have identified some areas that we're going to start a program to get ahead of that issue, because we do have areas that don't have pipes to convey the water down, and we do see erosion. And so a lot of times it's kind of a blend of our LDM projects, which helps with private property too. But this is public water. It's not the private water. It's public water that runs across private property. It might be in easements. Ravine projects are a little problematic in that they're tough to get to, and they can be expensive to fix, and you have to look at kind of natural stabilization methods.
Did you
to
put
keep
like
the,
riprap in there?
They
or-
put in what they call gabions, which are
What is that?
they're baskets of riprap that go down along the ravine that slow the water down and pond it, and so it can kind of step down the ravines. And then they'll do different plantings and different reinforced fabrics on the thing. So Terry loves this kind of stuff because it's very natural.
Yeah, it's all part of like a green and like a
the
garden.
ponds over
Yeah,
in
yeah. So
when they're done.
Terry will be releasing trout in there and stuff, so it'll be,
Well, I'm sure it'll be an interesting project, but it really
No.
did pique my curiosity.
Yep, so that's something new that our
Like a rain
natural
garden,
resource
Terry?
staff, yeah.
Well, kind of the same principles, but it doesn't look quite the same. But, so.
Yeah, interesting.
And then we've got some stormwater basin projects. So those are the big ones in the 5-year plan.
Okay. Now we're going to move on to the 5-year financial plans for the capital projects, if you're ready, unless you had some other questions for Mr. Albrecht.
No. The nice thing about all of this is that each year we're hearing about things as they're coming, and when you read through all of it, you have an understanding, but it's always good because our citizens are watching and they'll understand what we're doing as well. We have 5-year planning, but we hear about it, we read about it all the time. It's always good to be updated again and to talk about it again. It makes it fresh for all of us.
Okay. All of those projects that Mr. Albrecht just spoke about have a budget of revenues and expenditures that match each other. We do have several different funds actually that those revenues and expenditures run through, and we plug the numbers from the CIP into the budget for each of those funds. And the first one is the Improvement Construction Fund. So the portions of the street projects mainly are that are not the ITF fund and not the state highway funds, state aid road funds rather, are running through this fund, and it's a zero balance fund. So these would be the intergovernmental pieces that we get, special assessments, transfers. So this fund, it has a zero balance, and the revenues and expenditures match. So you can see in this particular slide, we've just plugged in all of the sources and uses from the projects that we just spoke about, and revenues equaling expenditures in each year, and that purple line being the fund balance. We don't really maintain a fund balance in this particular fund because the revenues equal expenditures. The next fund would be the Infrastructure Trust Fund, and this is really the city's funding portion of those road projects that comes from our ITF levy that we've spoken a lot about, and also from the that we get from the state for roads. They fund similar projects. We combine them into this fund, and when when we have a project, if it runs under budget, so our expenditures come in favorably, this is the fund that gets those savings, and then we're able to reallocate them in the future to fund future projects. And that's kind of where we're at on this particular fund. We look at the revenues and expenditures. Right now, the purple line being the fund balance, we had a couple favorable years, including 2013 on our projects, so our fund balance is higher, and we've allocated those to projects in 2014 and 2015. We've also been able to draw down on our state aid funds, which are funding some of those projects in 2014 and 15. As you see, 2014, the red bar being taller than the green bar. That's a use of fund balance. The target fund balance for the infrastructure fund, trust fund, is around the $2 million range, and as you can see out towards 2018, we've allocated our projects that way. This is something that we're rebalancing every year as we're looking at the funding sources for the projects that we have in the CIP. The street maintenance fund is where we fund our smaller street maintenance types of things, like our seal coating and crack sealing, traffic marking, right-of-way maintenance, the guardrails and that sort of thing. And we've run our monuments through there in the past as well. It is funded by the general fund transfer, water and sewer transfers, as it benefit, these type of projects benefit both of those general and water and utility purposes. That fund balance, we maintain a small fund balance in there to meet unprojected things that come up, and also cash flow for the funds. So we're kind of in that 35% range of expenditures. Parks Capital, I'm going to turn over to Terry.
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I want to share some information on the Parks Capital Fund. This fund maintains, has funding to maintain and improve the city's 76 parks and 7 miles of bituminous trails. Those trails are both in the park system and alongside our streets. So sometimes people forget that we fund the actual street, off-street trails through this fund, so I wanted to make sure you were aware of that. The Parks Capital Fund has 3 major funding sources that contribute to it. They are, did we skip a slide? Yeah, I'm sorry, you're a little too quick for me. I'll get quicker. They are the general fund support, and we have assumed some annual increases in that support. We have held that support down during the recent recession years, council members. You may recall that. And so the plan is to start making up for some of those lean years beginning in 2014. So you'll see a $50,000 increase planned in this budget in 2014. And then you'll see increases in the general fund transfer up to $925,000 in the subsequent years. The increases in general fund transfers will level off in the year 2017. The next chart will reflect that. Another source of funding is the infrastructure trust fund transfer. It's roughly 10% of the levy, and it amounts to about $300,000 a year. And the last source of fees is park dedication fees or development fees, and we project them at $150,000 per year. That ebbs and flows a lot, as you know. We had a couple years back probably $800,000 or $900,000. This year to date, we're probably at $75,000. So we never really know, but we kind of try to level that off and assume it'll be $150,000, at least over the course of the next 5 years.
Well, when we're built out,
Correct.
You're not going to be seeing that. The MRQ, how many properties down there that we still can get park dedication fees from? Do we know, Jenny?
Madam Mayor, we don't know. Some of those, if they're already platted, they may have already paid the fee. Also, there may be other considerations that the council may want land instead of cash down there.
We've done that in the past, but one of the things we try to get away from is the land part, because we don't need parks. We need to maintain the assets that we have, so we needed the money. rather than the land.
Madam Mayor, council members, the one park that we have left to acquire land for is a park on the new lake, Quarry Lake, and so
Yeah.
that will be in lieu
We do.
of cash fees
Yeah.
as the land around the quarry develops. So.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that we have down there that I see, because we talked about public space down around that lake once it's developed, so that would be one. Mary?
Terry, I have a question about the proposed park CIP for 2014.
Okay.
Big numbers interest me, and boy, there's a lot of fencing going in next year. Because I know the public gets to see this document, or will see this document, and somebody might raise a question. Could you just explain why so much fence in 2014?
There is a lot of fencing, and I'll come back to that and talk a little bit more.
Okay,
but
when
in one word, it's Lavon ballpark renovation. So,
okay.
Replacing all of the
Well, I saw the
all of
structures
fencing.
ramp, and I knew that was part of that, but
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This chart shows the contributions from the different sources that I just shared with you for the upcoming 5 years. And really, it's a good way to see how the general fund support increases for a few years to kind of make up for lost ground, and then levels off in the year 2017. So, to get back to Parks capital expenditures, back to your question, Councilmember Sherry, really there's one highlight for 2014, and that's renovating Lavon complex. We've had some success combining projects. We do bituminous projects. We try and do them every other year and put them together. We get better prices when we bid them out, and we're taking that approach with renovation of Lavon. So over the last couple years, we wanted to replace some of the fencing and the irrigation system, and we've also planned to expand the restroom. What we did is put that all into one project for 2014. It's a pretty big number. It's $1.2 million, but that complex is 30 years old. And I encourage you to drive by. If you go look at the scoreboards, a lot of them are leaning to about a 30-degree angle. It's amazing to me how just people running into those fences game after game, year after year. For 30 years, the fences are actually angling out. It gets to be a safety hazard after so much time, and that complex is in need of a facelift. So the other big part of that would be to expand, again, the concession stand and restrooms. Frankly, that was undersized probably the day the complex opened. So it will be good to get that work done and get Lavon up in good shape for the next 30 years. So that's why you see a lot of fencing, as you can imagine, on a six-field complex. There's a lot of fencing.
And I know that complex is heavily used. I hear from people outside of Burnsville who play ball there, and they just rave about it. So I think it makes sense to keep it nice.
So really, that is the bulk of the one project for 2014. The other little ones are we've got to replace some stairs that go down to the ball fields at Neal Park, and we're going to work with our dog park owners at Alamagnet to kind of refurbish the entrance there. It doesn't meet ADA standards, and we have pea gravel in there. If you've seen it, then it's kind of hard to keep in one place. It kind of goes where it wants to, and it's hard on our mobile.
It's a fitting gravel to use at a dog park, pea gravel.
Yeah.
What's the $1.8 million waiting for community sponsorship?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. We do have a list of postponed projects, and they were on page 71 of your budget document. But they are items that when we weren't contributing because of funding and the recession, we had to take some projects and postpone them. And so we put them on this list, knowing that when the funding, when we were able to restore the funding, we'd start putting those projects back into the capital plan. And we have started to do that, and the next graph will show a little bit of that happening now. But they are projects that were in our park system master plan and our trail system master plan that we had actually programmed, but we've never gotten to. And so we started to generate this list of postponed items.
Well, the key word that I saw in there was community sponsorship. Would that be tagging off of what happened at Cliff Fen, with the Lions stepping in and contributing a significant portion to expand and enhance what we were already planning to do?
Councilmember Keeley, that's exactly why we've kind of added that language. We do have wonderful local service organizations that have been very good to the city in terms of supporting the park system. And so there are some projects that lend themselves better to community support, a picnic shelter, the skate park, and you'll see those items. We actually broke it out in your budget is kind of items that would likely be good candidates for community support. And then there's items like trails and some of the basic infrastructure that, aren't quite as glitzy and fun to support. So,
Mary?
Well, and you talk about community support. I would think that some of these might be in the range of an individual who would like to donate or sponsor them. And we have the youth center expansion, which is huge, but we also have a permanent fishing dock at Sunset Pond, and it's $33,000, and a picnic shelter by the waterfront at Lavon. And I believe that the cost of that would be $80,000 in Lavon Park. I mean, these individuals who might have a really close attachment to these areas might consider donating something like that and having their name on it, and it would be a wonderful gift to the city and the future.
Absolutely, and also on that list is the youth center expansion.
Yeah.
We plugged it in at the higher number just so we didn't have ranges in there, but council members, I think you're aware we're looking at $500,000 to $1 million. We kind of identified ideally it'd be $1 million, so $1 million of that is for the youth center expansion.
And the other is the skate park. And that people can also, if they wish. And we have a nice program that our staff has put together, Dean and those folks.
Well, and we've
And
already
it's-
had a substantial donor to this skate park. I don't want to overlook that. So it's happening here. I think this is a new way of looking at some of these things.
Yeah.
Maybe not really a new way, but an old way that we're thinking about again. I mean, you go back 100 years, this was very common for people to donate things like this to cities. So why not do it again?
And we've been good at doing a lot of that,
Yeah.
like the Sue Fisher Park. We got that land to build that, and then we had our young people who helped build the first skate park, and now we're doing the renovation and the second phase. That's all of that is money that people have. We have a very, very generous community. I'll go to Dan and then back to Mary.
Well, I just want to compliment Councilmember Sherry's articulation of that statement. I thought it was very well put, and if the city needs a lead person on the team to go pitch, I would recommend Councilmember Sherry attend. That
I
was
would.
great.
Well, I'd be happy
Wait,
to,
made
or any council member, or the mayor,
Yeah.
or Terry. I mean, and that was going to be why I raised my hand. I was going to say, who should people contact if they want to do this? But I think anybody with the city, Terry,
A good starting point would be myself.
Yeah.
Give me a call.
because you know what the plan is and what the wishes are, the design is for that area. So
Yeah, we already
Why
have a
not?
list that I'm shopping
Yeah, wish
around,
list.
so
That's good because
Yeah.
the list is buried pretty deep into a thick budget document, and
Yeah.
so it's not really commonly known or well known.
Right.
So we really, other than personal contact, how much have we marketed this need or this opportunity for people
Yeah.
to make
On your way
contributions?
out, to the right, you will see the pamphlets for the skate park.
Awesome.
Staff has done a wonderful job. So if you have not seen that, look at the brochures,
Right.
and there.
I'll go a
to
step
the-
further.
to the
Have we
right.
done anything in our newsletter, on our website,
Yeah.
for people to
No, but we
constantly
could.
see these opportunities for, funds,
Like I said,
private
A
funds?
memorial
Or
for.
Attached, right. The way you put it was
I like
beautiful. When it's close to or to someone's, life, mission, somehow there's a personal connection to that desire, then that's, but I can honestly say that I don't know that really this is a very commonly known thing. You work with are a member of the Burnsville Foundation, the Lions Club.
Right.
They've adopted and find these things
Right.
because they work, but for most citizens out there, unless they see this publicized, see it on our website, see it visible, that there are projects that they can put their money to and put their stamp on, their name on, whatever opportunity. It's just not something we normally do as government on a regular basis, is market that opportunity and put it out there and make it readily available at any time for someone to find. So that's my recommendation, is we maybe rethink how we're marketing it, making it available to people who have the ability to give.
We will do more of that. We see this as a first step. We do use this. We share it with all the community service groups if they ask. I'm a little selfish. This is just the parks part of it, but we also have other
I mean, nobody wants to
departments.
line sewers and put their name on it.
Well, Steve,
Adopt the sewer line.
Fire and police, we have a lot of folks that donate, equipment to them, and so we combine those lists. We also do promote from time to time. The skate park, I know, has been in our bulletin.
Yeah.
And that's a project where individuals can donate small amounts. There's a separate nonprofit group that's raising money, and even if you can send
$5,000.
$25 or $50. We had a bank donate $5,000 towards that project, so.
And the need is $75,000. I just want to put that out and
For the skate park?
for the skate
You're
park.
still plugging. Are you leading that charge?
Well, no,
Campaign
we have a
finance
group.
chair.
We have a group that's, and I'm just helping. But there's a group. There's
Oh,
a
fantastic.
wonderful group that's doing that.
So you don't do the half pipe?
I would love to see that. Would that be
Oh,
phenomenal?
you know what, Jill?
Mayor out on a thing.
Yeah, Jill will probably have something to say about that.
With a
She doesn't let me do those things anymore.
Madam Mayor, I think
Cracking.
probably that's not a good idea.
But we're okay to do
Heather
it.
and Jill
Yeah, we
will
can
say,
go out
no,
and break
no,
our
no,
arm,
no,
but not the mayor.
Not any one of us. Not any one of us. Yeah, the workers' comp doesn't play.
I believe that's in the
Yeah,
same
one bed
category.
race blows it for everybody.
Might be in the same category as going down sliding hills on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Could I
Yeah.
inject one other thing? We, along those lines, now, the Lions example, the Lions Club and their contribution to Cliff End was huge. Do we have any other parks where a company or an individual has sponsored a major renovation of the park in exchange for desiring to have, because maybe they're born and raised in Burnsville, they lived there their whole life, they'd like to memorialize in some way their name, so it's this park is, the tennis courts or the basketball courts or the play area set, is sponsored by someone or a company or anything like that. We've had this discussion many times going back. I remember Tom Hansen, we talked about it 2-3 years ago, and I just wonder where has that whole effort really gone or evolved to?
We haven't had businesses sponsor a park. We have had other service groups. The Burnsville Lions sponsor Vista View Park.
Yeah.
They help build the shelter there,
Yeah.
the basketball courts, benches, and so they have kind of adopted that park. So we've had service groups do that, but we have not had businesses adopt a park, although we tend to target, when we have a special project like the
Sure.
playground replacement, then we will see
These
if
are
we
the
can
community
find somebody
groups,
to donate.
typically.
Yeah. The hard thing is that we only have two service groups in our community, Rotary and Lions.
Yeah,
And Lions does a really big job
the
of.
Lions share. Right?
Yeah.
They do a great job.
Yeah.
So I guess the question that I have is, should we, because we've talked about this, of doing this, should we approach this in a different way when it comes to the parks and make it more obvious, a list of things in the parks, or even put a program together where we can offer it up to the business or private community to make it available for them to do? Is it because I feel like we're only opening the door for the community groups, but we're not really opening any doors for anyone else, unless they just happen to hear about it?
Well, I'm going to go to Heather because our staff is doing a lot of great things about it. I think some of us have not heard about it, but Heather.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I think there are a couple of things to consider when you're talking about doing that. Number one, we did at one point in time do a lot of outreach on for the golf course to try and get people to sponsor holes at one point in time. That's very staff-intensive work, and frankly, we didn't get a lot out of those efforts. We had some holes sponsored, and then the economy went south.
Yeah.
But it's a very staff-intensive thing. When looking at the staff-intensive work related to approaching businesses, we really have a delicate balance.
Yes.
We as a government regulate these businesses as well. And so I think that we have tend to look to service groups as a group that is that we would approach, as opposed to the conflicts of interest that might arise from approaching businesses. We can make those but from time to time we're approached by businesses, and then we believe me, we have a list, and we can give them that list, and also have been approached about specific parks, and then we follow up on those requests. But we have been less proactive very deliberately because of the conflicts of interest that tend to arise when you're soliciting funds from businesses. So just to kind of give you that piece is really the rationale of some of this.
It sounds familiar to our initiative with the website advertising sales.
But that doesn't mean that
But we were able to
we,
get through some of that stuff.
but that doesn't mean that we can't do some of that outreach.
Well, yeah, and I don't know that it's necessarily a sales team or an intensive effort by staff, but more just using our means of communication, the website,
That
our
this is
newsletter.
available.
That, yeah, I can envision something in our newsletter and on our website that is essentially an advertising piece, a call to donors, if you will, for these particular projects around the city, and that could include sponsoring a park, along with the specific things within the park. So anyway, that's just, I think we don't have to spend a lot of labor time in it. I think it's just more of using our communication vehicles to help do that work for us.
Okay. Mary?
I like the idea, particularly the result. But I hear what Heather's saying is that there is a balance. We'd have to be kind of careful about how, and maybe there needs to be, and maybe we could put this or talk briefly on it at all-day session about what that balance is. Is there a policy that we would want to keep in mind? We really don't want to have staff going out selling stuff.
No,
And I don't think that's what you're saying.
No.
But maybe there's a way to do this encouragement and the sense of really touching the philanthropic nerve and generosity of a lot of people, individuals and businesses. But I think that's probably going to take more time than we could really hammer out today. So if you're all
I think
willing.
these are just all ideas that are being floated right
like,
now.
hey,
Yeah.
you know what, let's.
Yeah, I'd like to
Yeah,
revisit
and-
this
But be
discussion
careful about
again.
the relationship.
Actually, I think, right.
And just know that, there is a list, and
Yeah.
you all can, you all know what that list is. So when you're out talking to people, do so. I do.
Yeah, and that's the same thing as the requesting staff to spend a lot of time on it, and that's why we haven't got much.
No, but,
We haven't made really any progress.
Yeah.
We haven't used the right tools to get the word out.
Yeah.
And it's not our time or labor time by staff.
Okay, Terry?
Council members, I just add to that, we do tap that resource a lot at our enterprise facilities for advertising, our recreation brochure.
Yeah.
A lot of our users in our facilities tap that resource to sponsor hockey tournaments, golf tournaments.
Yeah.
The Performing Arts Center, as you know, has a lot of
sponsors and
sponsors. And also for programming things, movies in the park on Fridays, we do get a lot of private business sponsorship there. So
But I
No,
think
that's
what
very-
I'm
yeah.
talking
Go
about,
ahead.
excuse me, is more the idea of philanthropy as opposed to sponsorship. I think there is a difference, and
But
So-
just so that it's not lost to anybody, we do a good job of partnering with our community, whether that's business or individuals who have done so much and continue to do a great deal for our community. But what I'm hearing, and we all agree, that perhaps there are some tools that we can use, and then put that out there so people know that the opportunity is available to them to do more.
I will move on.
Okay?
This next slide shows the park CIP use of funds of $6.3 million over 5 years. The green part of the bars represents funds being spent on renovation and maintaining the park system. The orange colors show park and trail system improvements. So this is kind of a good look at, we've got to devote a lot of our funding to maintaining the system, kind of catching up on some of the maintenance issues. As you start to get into 2017, you start to see more of the orange in the bar. And that means we're starting to take some of those projects, improvements that were identified in the park system master plan and the trail system master plan, and at least get them programmed in the 5-year window now. So that's a good thing. Now, you'll note there's still some items on page 71, that unfunded list, but as we move out, I pull those projects off that list and plug them into the 5-year CIP. And finally, this chart compares the fund revenues, which are in green, and the expenses, which are in red for the next 5 years. And the purple line is the one I want you to focus on a little bit. You will notice that's our fund balance, and it dips down pretty low in 2015, 2016. And by 2018, it gets back to where we really think it should be, about 35% of our annual expenses. And so that's where we should be. And so it kind of says we're on the right course in terms of increasing the transfers into the fund.
It's a good-looking chart coming from the Parks Capital Fund.
Yeah.
It's not too many times that it's pointing
See the
up.
purple line going up again, yes. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Albrecht.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to talk briefly about the Equipment, Vehicle, and Facilities Capital Fund. The expenditures are $1.9 million next year, and that's pretty all-encompassing. That's our buildings, our facilities, it's all of our rolling stock, vehicles, equipment, and then a lot of our equipment that's in the facilities, PD and fire equipment also. And so one of the issues we have with this fund, as you'll see, is we have growing expenses in this fund, and that's due in part mainly to the age of some of our facilities. And so that's probably the big pressure, and we've added some new things too. We've added parking decks, parking ramps. Those things over time are now starting to get to an age where, you know, the first 5 to 10 years there aren't a lot of costs. Now there's some upkeep costs, and those start to plug into that. So with this fund, you see that we do have increasing costs over time, primarily funded by the general fund. And we do have some contribution from the water and sewer utility. For the most part, that's for vehicles that you see on there. We do have some facility stuff. However, the main facility that are supported by the utilities, the maintenance facility, is relatively new. And so we don't have a lot of big costs at that facility yet. So this one right here gives you an idea of what our expenditure is, kind of a break of vehicles and equipment and facilities. And for the most part, with vehicles, we're not vehicles to our fleet for the most part. We're right-sizing vehicles or changing those out, and we're able to spread the vehicles out for the most part and try to have those be pretty consistent. The facilities is where we see kind of our next challenge, long-term budgeting, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But you can see those kind of ebb and flow and then start to increase. Nope, that's fine. And then just highlights for 2014, the big one, we've got another fire truck coming online. Our fire trucks are our most expensive rolling stock vehicles compared to a plow truck or other trucks. They're on the magnitude of twice the cost, and so they are very expensive. We keep them for a long time, but they are expensive pieces of equipment. One thing we are going to do next year, which I think is key for the long-term planning, and that's why we're not saying we need to do something drastic right now, is we do need to get a good handle on our 30-year-old facilities that we have out there and the ones that are a little bit older than that. City Hall and the police station, we're in the 20-plus year range on this facility. And then you get to Fire Station 1, which is significantly older. We have the garage across the street. Some things are going to come to light as to how we handle that facility and the long-term maintenance there. But what we believe is kind of a missing link in our long-term facilities plan right now is an updated study that kind of looks at what's the condition of those facilities, what are our real needs, so that the council can dive in and say priority, not a priority, and kind of go through wants and needs and really get a good handle on that. And that'll allow us to then come back to you with a long-term fund plan before we make any recommendations about whether we need to increase dollars in that or decrease. Let's get a handle on what are the ramifications of it, and what can we live with and what can we live without. And so we want to do that. That's why we're, as I said, we're not really raising any alarms related to that right now, because we have some flexibility. We can put off some of the things, and we do a pretty good job working together department-wise of jockeying things around. A couple of items I do want to touch on that we will get into is, you'll recall we did some generator upgrades that were mandated this year. We did 3 different facilities did get upgraded. However, we did not. We weren't able to upgrade the City Hall generator system, and the reason for that is, number one, the generator system is actually located in the middle of the building in the basement.
Yeah.
Don't know why that was, but it's not a good place for a generator because it doesn't allow us to upgrade the generator to meet the emission standards in a cost-effective manner. And the reason we care about that is we, at most of our facilities, at City Hall, for example, we save about $30,000 a year being on what's called the Peak Shave program, which allows Dakota Electric, when they need to put us on generator power to manage their peaks. They don't do it very often, but under the federal mandates, we have to have a generator that meets emission standards to participate in that program. This generator would cost about $350,000 on a 20-plus-year-old generator to do that. That doesn't make it's not real cost effective on a $30,000 payback, at least right now. We want to look at what our long-term options are first, because replacement of that generator is about $500,000, and that's going to buy you another 40 years of life. And so that's something we need to look at with this facility study. What makes sense? What's the payback to the city on that? It may be retrofitting the generator or putting in a new one, but let's see what the council feels we need to do with this facility long-term before we make that decision. Could we combine a generator with our existing reservoir? Something we should at least consider. We've looked at some of those options. So we want to bring that back as a big picture to you, not just focused on the generator. And so we've decided for this year, and the budget reflects that we won't see that peak shavings at this facility, at least for this year. The good news is on our electric use of this facility, we continue to upgrade with LED fixtures. We are driving costs down where we can at this facility. And so that's an important component of that facility study. So as we jump to the fund balance, a couple of things we want to note to you is future plans are going to need to address it. We see balance zero. Again, as I mentioned, we can, if you want to jump to that slide, Kelly, we can certainly, what we do is we tend to manage that on a 2 to 3 year basis. Our 5-year needs, we identify them, and then we do the same thing. We prioritize things and say there's something we got to do, this can be moved out. And so we think we can operate at that level, but long term we're going to have a strategy as things get older to make some decisions about what buildings we want to keep, and maybe there's some buildings or things that can go away and some things that we need to prioritize. And so we just want you to be aware that's probably the one thing coming out of our CIP this year that needs to be on our radar. Some of our stuff is aging that we do need to take a look at on the facility side of things. And so we will bring back a more comprehensive look at that with that facility study next year to give you a better handle on those aging facilities, and so that we can decide where do we want to be with those facilities in 15, 20 years, which ones should we invest the money in and which ones are not as important, or we're going to make some changes to those in the future. So.
And that also includes the water treatment plant, that's 30.
Well, the water treatment plant is funded separately from this fund through the water utility, and that you've already got those upgrades programmed for that plant in the CIP separate from this. So that's taken care of.
That facility is on the utility budget.
Our newer facilities aren't, is in need of upgrades. The key ones that we've identified: City Hall, Police Station, garage across the street, the fire stations, particularly Fire Station 1. Those are the key facilities we need to get a handle on with what we're going to do long term, what the plans are. And part of that is we can do some things to extend the lives of the facilities, but we want to know where we want them to be before we spend money on smaller things and start updating things if we're going to make changes. And so that's something that we'll be bringing to you next year in a more comprehensive picture. We'll do that in advance of the budget and CIP, so we can decide what our path's going to be, and then the budget CIP we bring you will reflect the direction you want to go with those facilities.
Yeah. Dan?
What was the general plan when this building was built, do you believe, because you weren't here obviously, but or what's typically done in city government when it comes to city facility, fire station facility? I mean, this is about 20 years old, you said?
Yeah, it was built in roughly 1989. So.
And we did if you remember, we did the roof. Was that 2 years ago?
Yep. And most of buildings these days, you build them for at least 50 years. That's your plan, generally. And I would tell you most government buildings are going to go beyond that. So I think we have to look beyond that horizon, and we have to decide, being in this building, the things that I would tell you that I think need the most use is I think we have to spend some time looking at our police station. Mm-hmm. Things have changed, how they operate, and they wear some things pretty hard over there, and so we need to look at that. Our maintenance staff, honestly, for a 25-year-old building, this building looks pretty good inside and is well kept. And so that Fire Station 1, I think, is something I would put on your that if you've been in that fire station, that's an older fire station. Yeah. It has some things that were never intended to maybe be that way for 30-plus years. That fire station was built in the mid-'70s, I believe, and so it's got some things. We need to decide what we're going to do with that facility, and then ultimately, depending on what we do with our youth programs, we need to decide with what we do long-term with the garage across the street, too. So that's an aging facility also, and we need to spend some money on a roof on the horizon on that facility, and roofs on big facilities aren't cheap. You're talking $500,000 easily on those roofs.
Yeah. Well, from this building standpoint, I mean, I think it's big enough
Yep.
to house and support our needs, other than maybe some modifications, as you're saying, over police. And, the carpet in this room wasn't replaced. I don't
We
know
replaced
how long
about, what,
ago.
2 years ago,
Yeah,
3 years
fairly
ago?
new.
Yeah, it's been within
So
the last year.
we're
3 years
funding the
ago.
maintenance and
Yeah.
upkeep and updating of it. And structurally, I would assume it's fine. So is it more, from this building standpoint, just cosmetic?
I think it's
and
dealing with our
modeling?
generator system long-term that we want to look at, and then the wear on the police station, which I think if you've been in the bowels of the police station,
Yeah.
the locker rooms, the shooting range, the garage area, it gets worn hard. It's used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and so it wears different than this side of the facility. And also, it was built for policing in the 1980s, not necessarily for policing now. So those are the things. Same with the fire station. I think we need to look at that. And then some facilities like the garage, we need to decide where are we going to be with that facility in 10 years. And some of those things will come to light as we work through our youth partnerships and decide what we've got long term, because there's some financial commitments that will need to be made if we want to continue to use the whole facility. Or maybe it's just there's a lot of decisions to be made with that. So,
Agreed.
but I agree, City Hall, I at least feel like our staff does a great job of keeping up City Hall, and I don't see any big expenditures other than just typical wear things at City Hall. And I think from a space standpoint, you'd commend the city back in 1990-ish.
Yeah.
They built adequate facilities, and I think we're right-sized. I mean, when you go to some
Great.
cities and see, I think they did a very good job of right-sizing this facility for our needs. So.
Okay.
Okay. Our next equipment fund is the IT Capital Fund. And its purpose is to fund the software and hardware of all the different systems within the city. And this one, some highlights. We also run the phone system through that. We have a phone system replacement that is coming in 2014. Some IT data center cooling system replacement for $50,000, and another larger item coming up in 2016 would be a battery backup replacement. We have systems in all different areas that run through here. A couple of them that are going to have a little bit larger software upgrades next year. Programmed in would be the community development software and fleet maintenance, which the fleet maintenance software is quite old, so that one will be completely refreshed on that particular system. The writing on this might be a little bit small for the screen, but over 5 years we're looking at $2.6 million. We try to spread that out annually, and as we have it broken down, computers and infrastructure, those would be the PC kinds of things. Software development for other areas, recreation, finance, public safety is actually in its own category there in the green. So that is a big system that requires updates every year. And then just other systems in other areas in the purple. As we move on to the fund balance in this one,
Well, this is a good fund balance.
it does look like it's growing. I think that is more of a factor that IT is a little bit harder to predict which areas are going to have needs as the needs are changing a little bit or so. We've identified amounts that we spend in each category generally on an annual basis, but this allows some flexibility for some updates and upgrades as they come along. They'll be programmed in as they get closer in the more 2 to 3 year time frame. So as you see in the out 3 to 5 year time frame, we maybe haven't identified them as much, but provided some funding. And then we're going to go back to the enterprise funds. I guess I'll take this particular slide. This shows you what makes up our enterprise funds, and the majority is the Water and Sewer Fund and the Stormwater Fund. Those are our largest funds. And then we have the sidewalk snow plowing being just a tiny amount, and the street lighting. And then the other three would be our recreational facilities, the ice center, golf course, and the performing arts center.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to tackle the first couple funds, and then Terry will take care of the recreational funds. So just talking about our water and sewer fund, it is our biggest operating fund. Next year, about almost $20 million. And that funds both capital and operations. We've got significant operations. Running a water utility operation, essentially a business, a separate business, is quite cost-intensive, both in electricity and labor and repairs. And then also, you think about all the things, too. We've got costs at City Hall related to support of that. We have HR, we have finance staff, we have all of that. You're running a business, essentially, with the water operations. That covers our groundwater. Well,
I'm sorry.
That's fine. And you just see a description there briefly of the things that are covered by that operation.
Moving on to rates. Whoops.
So if we talk about rates for the water fund, the 2014 rates, we have a long-term plan of trying to keep our rates at 4.5% or less. That's really what our goal is, and it looks at our long-term needs. With that, this year, we have started to try to lessen the bonding long-term. That's a goal, too, is to get this fund off of bonding as much as possible. We are using bonding for our larger capital expenditures. And so we're trying to have a balanced approach with that. We don't want that to become a crutch of this fund where it's paying so much in debt service that you're eating up that investment. So that is a long-term goal. We are asking our staff 4.5%. To some may seem like too much, but with our needs, I think we have to remember, too, we are heading through kind of that peak. We talk about our streets. Our utilities are in the same boat. We're heading kind of through that peak period. And so, like I said, we do in 10 plus years see the light at the end of the tunnel as we get through those, and then we'll really have an opportunity to lessen those rates and be much more conservative with that. But you do see what we're proposing there, and just to give the council, because I know you like to see what that is, to a typical family that's using 5,000 gallons a month, you're looking at an increase of about 55 cents a month on the water rate, and so that's not a big increase, and you're looking at about 70 cents a month on the sewer rate per month on your average family.
Mary?
I noticed at the bottom of the slide you have a 7.5% increase in I would guess you're going to address that, but
Sure. We are actually absorbing some of that increase.
that's a lot.
The issue for the Met Council is they continue to have to meet higher and higher standards for their discharges into the Minnesota River in our case.
So that's federal.
That's well, they discharge into the Minnesota River, and they're told you have to meet the following water quality, and so they're constantly chasing federal regulations on what that water quality could be. They are also at a period, though, where their infrastructure needs significant investment. I think we've touched on a little bit. They have some significant, over the next 3 years, sewer projects in Burnsville specifically, where they are basically either replacing or relining the entire interceptor system in Burnsville. And so that system's at that age, and so that's where we're seeing those increases.
And the Met Council really provides
Yes.
our sewer
Yes.
service.
We essentially, as a city,
people
pump
need
it to a
to
point,
understand.
and then they take it and dispose of it and treat it.
Right.
And that's what the costs are. Yep.
It's, that's treated over at the Seneca plant.
Yes,
correct?
that is correct. Yep.
Yeah.
So our stuff heads to Egan down along the Minnesota River.
Good.
So.
Yeah. So one of the things that we have been talking about, a city manager, Ms. Johnston and I sit on the mayor-managers group for Dakota County. And one of the things we talked about is our rates. When you're paying $2.54 per 1,000 gallon, per 1,000 gallons, what does that break down to about a gallon of water?
I just happen to have that information.
I'm so glad that you have that. A gallon of water.
A gallon of water, you're running at about, for the rate without our monthly charge, because we do have a monthly connection charge, you're at about 0.25 cents per gallon. So, but I think the bigger thing, public water gets a bad name sometimes because people don't like the taste or things of that nature. But from a value standpoint, there's no argument when you compare over a 50-year period owning a well versus a city. On average, you're paying about, over the life, if you had to pay your connection costs for your house and all the things related to city costs, it's about a penny a gallon over a 50-year period for city water. It's about 2 cents a gallon for private well water over that same period of time. Yes, you have more control of your water supply, but it is more expensive, and on the magnitude of almost twice as expensive. And so that's the thing that people don't commonly, they forget about the cost of the well and all the things that it takes to run a well because they don't get a water bill every month. They pay big chunks, or they pay through their electric bill. They don't get a bill for it, so they tend to forget that there is a cost to that on a monthly basis too. And so I think that's important when you look at water. Minnesota especially, because we have plentiful water still, we have very low, even though we look at these rates, we do have low water costs compared to the rest of the country and the world for that.
And one of the things that I think about because of reaching this peak, how much it cost us to keep this system running. And to make sure that our residents and our businesses get the water when they want it and when they need it. And when you look at $2.04 per 1,000, and then when you look at a gallon of water, and you compare that if you're going to go to the store and buy a gallon of water each time, and what a gallon of water costs at the store, and what municipal.
Which in places where they don't have drinking water is what they have to do, and that's why the costs are so expensive. So, we'll jump to the next slide. I think the big things we talked about is our aging water system. We're really in the peak of that, and we are hopeful that some technologies are coming very rapidly on the water side that we're going to lessen that peak a little bit. They're happening. So it's not that they're going to just, how quickly are they at a point where we're comfortable deploying those and it's cost effective. Right now they're rather expensive, and that's because there isn't a lot of competition or companies doing these types of linings of water mains, but it's a matter of time. It's like sewer lining. When it first came out, it was the same way. Now there's a dozen companies that do sewer lining. There's only 1 or 2 that do water main lining in the country. That's going to, with the costs and cities not having money, it's just a matter of time that more companies get into that realm too. So we see that coming very quickly, and so that'll help. Capital improvement funding, obviously we've got our 5-year plan. We are very conscious our street improvement program is linked directly with our sewer and water program because there is a huge impact to the sewer and water program with the street program. And so we do take that into consideration as we identify streets and move forward with that funding. As mentioned, we plan to cap, we are proposing to cap it at 4.5, and if we can get under that, that's our goal, to continue to put pressure on our staff to try to get that down, use new technologies, different ways to get that down. Because even though it's a great value, we're conscious of the impact to the pocketbooks of our residents because there are a lot of fees and a lot of taxes out there that they're paying. So.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit about the Stormwater Fund. We're $5.7 million next year. This fund funds basically all of our maintenance of the stormwater system and the ever-changing regulations that we are chasing as a city. We're no different than the Met Council is with their sewage discharge. We're challenged with water quality at both lakes and the Minnesota River, and with different things that we have to do as a city. And we also have that infrastructure that we need to support, and so that's part of that. Jump to the next slide. Just touching base on that rate overview. We do have a REU system where it's a residential equivalent unit where we collect our water rate or our stormwater rates. The good news, I think, is we are not proposing an increase for next year. Staff has got a very good long-term plan in place. We feel comfortable about that, and with that comfort allows us to run at minimum fund balance because we feel like we've identified the issues that are coming our way and we know what they are, and so we can run the fund a little leaner than we would normally be comfortable, and that's due in great part to finance staff work, natural resource, and Terry's department's hard work, working with engineering department as a team. So we feel good about that. We do show 1% in future years, more as a contingency to see if there's any regulation changes or things like that, but we'll take that year by year. We believe that we're going to have opportunities. This year we felt we had an opportunity to cap that and not have an increase, and so we felt that that was important to do when we have those opportunities. We don't need to build excess fund balance if we don't need it over the 15 to 20 years. That's our approach to that.
Dan?
Is the stormwater, Refresh my memory, what is funding the water quality mitigation in Keller and Crystal and others?
This would be the stormwater
This
fund,
is-
exactly
this is
right.
the-
So there was a multi-year plan, a 15-year plan or something many, many years ago was put in place, and our stormwater rates went up
Yep.
extremely high and excessively high in the eyes of the people who were paying the bill. Are we seeing then a leveling off of what that demand to support that system is
Yep.
and or any future?
Yep.
Because we
And
really
that's-
haven't identified any.
You're seeing that, and we're
Other
not
projects.
building things that we don't need. And I think that's part of it, too, is we have what we need in place. Terry's staff's identified what we need in the future years, and staff feels comfortable saying, look, we don't need to continue at that rate. We can level that off, and we feel like that'll, from a rate comparison standpoint, that brings us back to the pack of some other cities. The good news for us is we got out in front of it. There are a lot of cities that are struggling now because they put off a lot of those initiatives.
Sure.
To raise the rates that dramatically in this climate is much different and much more difficult, I think, so.
And you see that a lot of the work that's been done in the last 15 years have really shown results. If you look at Early Lake, Early Lake is now off the impaired list. And did we have another one that went off the impaired list as well?
No, we have a
Just-
couple more that are very close.
Very close.
Removed from the list, but
So when you look at the results, the results are really terrific.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
Well, I hope we get something for our money because we paid a ton for it.
Yeah,
Mayor,
and
tax-
and we've cleaned up that whole shopping center area also. If you look at all of that, because that center did not have a stormwater drainage system because it wasn't,
It was all going into early.
well, yes, and because back in the 70s, you didn't have the regulations
Yeah.
in place. And then we had to go back and fix, that's what a lot of that was, is to go back and fix all of that. And now you've seen the results with Early Lake off the impaired list and 2 very close, so
That's
we're
good
doing
news.
very good.
And it's allowed us some flexibility on the development side, too, to do some proactive infrastructure that allow for future development to reduce the amount of ponds and water resources used there.
well, and I would just say it's put in place infrastructure that allows us to have, 0.1% increases as new regulations come out. We're ahead of the curve.
And they are going to be coming out from the feds.
Oh, yeah. They're always coming.
Yeah, there are new rules that are coming out, and that's going to be something we're going to have to start talking about. Staff will be bringing that to us because I've been seeing a lot of that coming from the EPA on water, the Clean Water Act, as well as the Clean Air Act.
Last little snapshot, another good piece of news, we aren't issuing any or planning any new debt from this fund, so you see the tail end of our debt payments going and disappearing in this fund, so that there will be no debt service. And that's another reason we can keep rates
Very
down,
high,
too.
very high.
Because 100% of your dollars are eventually going to the things you need and not to pay for borrowing. And so that's another part of the long-range plan.
Then more can go into the parks.
Well, it gives the council flexibility, but
Yeah.
these are from the stormwater rates, so.
Yeah.
Jumping to the street lighting fund, again, to touch on what that pays for is it pays for the street lights. We collect rates to people. If you have a neighborhood and what we call continuous lighting in your neighborhood, you pay for that lighting. If you don't have that in your neighborhood, you don't pay for that lighting. Everybody in town, though, does pay for what we call our major roadway lighting. That's on all our collector streets, our highways, all the highways, county roads. The city owns all that lighting. The counties don't pay for any of that lighting. The city owns it. At all of our traffic signals, all that lighting. So the city pays for that lighting. The majority of this fund, about 80% of it, goes just to pay the annual electrical costs. The rest of it goes to capital. We jump to the next slide. We're going to spend about $102,000 in 2014, and that's pretty annual. The nice thing about our street lighting is, for the most part, we're on top of our maintenance needs there. And so we've got sufficient rates coming in to cover, right now, at least in the short term, the electrical increases, which average 3% per year, and still get done what we need to get done and run it at a pretty lean fund balance. And so, again, as with the last fund, we are not proposing any increases to our rates this year. And so we think that's another good positive thing coming out.
Mary?
On the streetlight replacement, are you replacing the lights with LED lighting?
Yes, what we do with our lighting, well, we're replacing everything we can as it's due with LED lighting. Now, with Dakota Electric and Excel, the state currently does not have a rate program for LED lighting, so they do not install it. However, we believe that with the next rate hearings with Excel, that's going to change. And so the next 5 years, we will have Dakota Electric and Excel making offerings to us in the LED realm. We are changing the things that we own. We own about a quarter of our system, and as we upgrade that system, that's all going in as LED. As we have opportunities to take over pieces of Dakota or Excel system that make cost sense to us, Parkwood's a good example.
Yeah,
the city was
that-
paying for numerous lights that were out there that were high wattage, 250, 300 watt lights. We were able to replace those with our own system because we were replacing the roadway. It was cheap to do it at that time. And so that's an LED system, but the city owns it now versus Dakota Electric.
So did Dakota Electric own
They
that
owned the
before?
previous system, and then
Oh,
we
I
took
didn't
over
know that.
ownership with the
Yeah.
new system and paid for it.
Yeah,
Yep.
because I live
Yep.
right
Exactly.
off
So
of Parkwood, and
they did
those
own
are
that.
really beautiful
Yep.
lights.
So that's
I
a
mean,
good light, and we're
It's a very
so
good
we're
light.
employing that strategy as we redo neighborhoods. We evaluate the neighborhood. If there's an opportunity that's makes more cost sense to the city to take ownership, we do. If not, our partners replace the lights and upgrade them as we redo neighborhoods. So.
Good.
And remember, with the utility companies, when you go to LED, their revenue goes down.
They like selling electricity at night. They don't have a problem with that. And they'll be the first ones to tell you that that's not an issue for them, and so they just assume not. It's not a priority. It's not that they don't care. They just don't make it a priority.
Yeah,
so.
right. Okay.
Thank you.
So as you can see with the street lighting fund, we're trying. We have the flexibility in this fund to really match our needs and our resource here, and so that's a good thing. And we're able to, for the most part, manage that and keep our fund balance, above where it needs to be, but not get it too big because we just don't need that. So we are proposing again a 0% increase for next year. Sidewalk snow plowing fund. When I came to the city of Burnsville, I couldn't believe that you guys plowed everybody's sidewalk. But I now am a believer, and it is, I will tell you, for someone who lives on a sidewalk, to pay $12 a year to have your sidewalk snow removed for the entire winter is a pretty good value. So I think it's a good value system, and what we've been able to do with that system, if you want to jump to the next slide, we've basically been able to, again, have a 0 rate increase. And the reason for the system is because we don't want to have turnover every year with our contractor, because it is more of a customer service challenge than anything is having a good contractor. We now are bidding essentially 3 winter blocks at a time, and we just bid last year for a 3 winter block. So our rate is fixed for 3 years with our contractor. So we are fixed right at the cost level that we're bringing in on what we call an average winter, and so there's no reason to increase those rates to cover that cost. And so we feel good about projecting a 0 at least until the end of that contract.
Mary?
Well, I just want to remind everybody that this idea was brought to us by a citizen
Yeah.
who lives on a corner where
Yeah.
2 sidewalks
Yeah.
meet.
Yeah.
And so that it was her proposal when we were
Yeah.
wrestling with what are we going to do? How are we going to enforce the ordinance that says you must keep your sidewalk clean? And she came up with this idea.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah. And our residents brings, because the other one was they had fence. They had their backyard
Yes.
and a sidewalk, and a couple brought that to
Couldn't
both
get-
Mary and
yeah.
I. And they couldn't, so
There.
the front of their house didn't have a sidewalk. But the back of the house where they have a fence had the sidewalk, and they were responsible for it, and they just don't get out there to do it.
This solves a lot of problems.
Yes.
And I
It
think
really
for
solved the whole
everyone-
Well, and
lot
it
of
doesn't
problems.
increase the city's cost. You're able to provide a service with really no additional cost to the city because you're leveraging those people, and so it's a great value to those that live there. It's a great value to the city too.
So, very good.
Did you want to talk about that one?
No, what we would just want to show here is we don't have a lot of good history. We've basically, in the 3 years I've been here, we had the snowiest winter, the least snowiest winter, and then last winter we had one where it snowed like an inch every other day. So we're still getting there.
Out there.
Yeah. So, but we do know that from a fund balance standpoint, we're able to kind of hit what we think is our average winter. And so right now you have kind of projected out our average winters. There will be years where the uses far exceed but we're not looking, this is not a fund that we really need to have a balance in other than we want to be kind of what our average winter is, and that's how it's projected. So
Okay.
I turn it over to Terry.
Thank you, Steve. The ICE Center Fund has about a $1.1 million budget. It's an enterprise fund, and so we bring in enough in revenues, not only to offset our operating expenses, but also to pay for the capital items, except for very large items. Council, you may recall the $5 million renovation. We do put general fund support into that. But our ICE Center does very well in terms of generating revenues in comparison to other ICE centers. There are a few significant capital expenditures that we wanted to share with you this evening in the 5-year plan. We will replace our second ICE resurfacer in 2014. You may recall we replaced the first one in 2013. That will make us all electric at that facility, so all of the concerns about emissions and the testing required will go away for us anyhow, because we won't have any internal combustion pieces of equipment. The other big ticket item on the horizon in 2018 is the roof replacement. And I guess I've been around, this will be my second roof replacement at the ICE Center, so I guess it's time to retire when that so if you look at the sources, revenue and expenses at the ICE Center, and the purple line reflects the cash balance. The one thing that we'll want to talk more about is the roof replacement. That big ticket item will pretty much wipe out the fund balance or get it very close to zero. And so we may want to talk more about that. Is that the appropriate thing to do as it gets closer to 2018? Questions about the ICE Center? Golf course fund is a $262,000 operating budget. I'm pretty proud of the job that our staff at the golf course have done this year. We lost 45 days in the spring to the late start. And that put us down about 3,000 rounds. And it's just hard to make those up. Doesn't matter how nice fall is, some people put away their clubs after Labor Day. So, but our golf course will break even or generate just a small profit this year. So, and that's very, very good if you talk to other golf courses, given the weather we had this year. So,
How did they do it?
well, there isn't much you can do to make up those rounds, as I mentioned. It's really cutting expenses. You know, we put off projects that we didn't have to do. And
So Dan was
and
taking people in, getting them their clubs, then running out, mowing, pulling people back in, getting their clubs.
He is, because I was out there playing golf, and Dan was doing the mowing.
Yeah, I've seen him
He's out there
doing gardening,
Yeah.
mowing, doing greens work, and
he works very hard. He takes it as a personal
It's
challenge
a-
when things like this come up.
it's a very, very nice course
It's a beautiful
to play.
course.
It really is.
And I think that he really just, it's his baby, and it shows. I mean, it's beautiful what he does over there.
We're able to pay for our capital items through the revenues. We do have a parking lot to replace in 2016. Of course, we keep our fees at the top of the market. And we do our projections based on average weather, which, as Steve mentioned, we haven't had for the past
Or maybe this
5
is the new
years
average.
anyhow. But and then this shows, of course, the expenses and revenues and the cash fund balance at the golf course. And we do have a few capital items, as I mentioned, starting in 2016 lot, and then a couple of mowers in 2017, 2018. So that's why you see that dip. But we have no concerns, and we don't think you should, about the fund balance at the golf course. Questions? If not, I'll move on to the Performing Arts Center. It is a $2.4 million budget. We have a new contract with Venue Works that goes into effect in 2014. That's the same company that's been there for the last, since the start of the Performing Arts Center, and that will go into place in 2014. You'll be hearing more. We have targeted the December 17th meeting to share with you the details of our naming rights agreement, that we will start to see revenues coming in 2014. We have an annual capital plan in place now. It's a fairly new facility, but you do need to stick things in. And so we do have a capital plan in place, and we're starting to replace some of the minor things at the facility now. And we are projected to annually reduce the operating loss in the amount needed from the general fund over time. The operating loss is projected to be $235,000 at the end of 2013, down $20 from 2012. And our budget shows that we will reduce that by another $20,000 in 2014. This chart shows the funding sources. The green bars and the expenses are in red, and the purple line shows the amount due to the general fund. And as you can see, the reliance on the general fund is going in the right direction. That's the zero line at the bottom of the bars, and so we want that purple line to go up like it is. This chart shows revenues in green compared to operating expenses in red, and again, the purple line depicts the net operating loss, which is being reduced and continues to improve over the 5-year outlooks. With that, questions about the Performing Arts Center? We'll turn it over to Kelly.
All right. We'll talk a little bit about debt balances that we've had and where they're projected based on the capital that has been projected and all the things we've talked about in these other funds. As you can see, the debt in the future years we've provided you about 10 years worth of history, but the future years are pretty stable on the debt balances. This includes all debt types, so special assessment improvements, tax increment, utility funds, other facilities and equipment, and the Burnsville Performing Arts Center. This just shows you on the outstanding debt, we had $62.4 million or projected to have at the end of this year, 2013. And it is mainly special assessment improvements. Those are those when we do a road project in an area where the property benefits, they are paying for part of that road project, and we allow them to pay their portion of that road project. So we need to finance that with the use of bonds. So the green pie piece is being paid for by the annual payments of special assessments from property owners, matched up to our debt payments on those. And in the utility funds, we talked earlier about the utility fund debt as well, so that's another approximately quarter, and the Burnsville Performing Arts Center construction. There's also an ice center renovation that Terry alluded to earlier that was $5 million that's being paid down right now, and also tax increment debt that's being paid for from tax increment funds. Annually, we have a few places where we have debt service. We wanted to point out the debt service fund has a levy of $1,036,000. It's been pretty stable. That pays for a portion of the ice center bond payments, a maintenance facility, and those street improvements, because earlier we did have some in earlier years, we had some city portion that was also bonded. Now that's being paid for by the ITF, but there are some bonds that still have a city portion of debt levy. That makes up that $1 million. The ITF fund, there was 1 year back in, I believe it was 2010, that we issued bonds instead of paying cash to make that particular year go a little bit further. So there's an annual debt service levy that's within the ITF fund of $366,000. And then on the ice center, we have also assigned a portion of general fund balance to pay for the next 10 years of $140,000 towards that ice center. So that reduces the annual amount that we need to levy for the ice center debt by using fund balance. So proposed plans for issuance of debt, we would have the annual special assessment portion of the project. We don't have any property tax supported plans for any of the CIP for 2014. In 2015, that Cliff Road and 35W ramp, that very large project that we talked about earlier, those would, the plans right now that they would be a TIF bond, but it would be only a portion paid by TIF and a portion paid by general fund levy. So about 20% paid by TIF and a portion paid by general fund debt levy. And the water and sewer water and sewer utility would have a $3.7 million bonding in 2014, and then a portion in the future years as well. But we have reduced that from last year's plan by using some cash balance. And this is just a chart showing those same kinds of things where we're issuing debt. The base special assessment out in the future years, the one project for Cliff Road, 35W interchange, and then the water and sewer utility bonds. When you add those to the existing debt that we have, the green bar, the darkest green bars, portion of the bars, that's the existing. So that's the debt we have today. It's already been issued, and we're paying that down annually. You can see those balances decreasing. Every year we're adding another little piece on. That's the colorful parts, the blue and the purple parts are added on. In the following year they become existing debt, so that lighter green portion. So you can kind of see how those are filling in the balances that are being paid down on the existing debt. So we really end up having a stable amount of principal balance in that 5-year projection. And unless there are any questions on debt, we can move on to fees and charges.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ben.
What percentage of does this represent in our projected annual total budget? This is staying flat, so it's obviously going to be a smaller, shrinking percentage, but I'm just curious, roughly off the top of your head, just what percentage is?
So the debt service portion, about the $1 million that comes out of the debt service, as far as the levy goes, we have a $29 million levy, and we have $1 million going to the debt service levy of that 29. So
it's a little small percent.
Yes, it's a small percentage.
Very small.
Yes. Thank you.
Fees and charges. In your book, there's a very long list of fees and charges,
Yes.
very specific, for 41 pages of fees and charges. We wanted to. We've already highlighted in each of the plans what those enterprise fund rates are increasing, but I wanted to put those back on one slide. I actually saw this slide at the last work session as well. But just to kind of summarize all of those increases, we have the 4.5% increase in the water and sanitary sewer fund, but no increases in the stormwater, street light, and sidewalk, and fairly conservative, smaller increases projected in those out years.
When I looked through, there were a lot of pages with no change to the fees.
On the fees and charges. And we have some policies in our financial management policy that guides how the departments look at those fees and charges, and when they're determining what to do, they're trying to stay in the upper quartile, so that we're charging for user fees where we can without being out of the market. So they are doing calling around and finding out what other cities are charging on those fees. Some fees are cost recovery. So, for instance, in some of our recreation programs, they look at what it costs to those services, and those are the main ones, I guess, types of fees. But you have in there how they've determined those fees. Okay. Also within your budget workbook, you have a section on the financial management plan, and we look at that every year and see if there are any updates would propose changing, and we have a couple. The first is the LGA, in response to some concerns that council had on LGA. In the past, LGA has not been the most reliable source. When we've been promised a certain amount of LGA, it doesn't always come in, and so you expressed some concern on whether we should rely on that on our budget. The city is expecting, or has been told, we'll have $85,000 of LGA. The proposed amendment to the financial management plan is that we count on $50,000 in the annual budget, up to $50,000 in the annual budget of that LGA. And then if the rest of it comes in, you can allocate that in your budget process the following year for one-time type expenditures the following year when it is a known amount. Or if it doesn't come in, then we don't have to make cuts during the year for that not coming in.
If I'm reading correctly, and what we want to do is to make sure that we use it for one-time expenditures and not put it into the general fund. Remember, we did this back in 2001, Kelly, and then we lost it, and then we had to backfill. And all along, we did not put that into the general fund, and we were okay. But then we put it into the general fund, it went away, and then we had to backfill the general fund. So in the policy that you're putting forth right now, is that to use it for one-time expenditures?
The policy
Because
is...
I don't know, the 50,000 just doesn't make sense to me.
Just the way you worded it.
Okay. The 50,000 is in the revenues of the general fund right now, so that is, we're relying on that for operations, a smaller amount than the whole amount. If it comes in at the 85,000, we'll have a $35,000 amount to allocate next year to
One-time
expenditures.
So what happens when it goes away? Then we'll have to come back and backfill that 50,000?
Yeah.
No, yeah, and here's
Yeah.
where I
Mary.
think that the mayor and I are thinking the same
Yeah.
thing. Are you saying here you want to every year plug in or
50,000?
assume there's going to be 50,000 from LGA every year?
Up to 50,000. So we would make that, we would analyze what it is we think we're getting and where, whether it's...
Yeah, but this is the first time since I've been on council that we've ever gotten any LGA money.
Yeah.
Is that, are we thinking the same thing
Yeah,
here?
and then what happens if in 2 years they decide again, or even next year that they decide
no
to
money.
not give us any LGA? I'm going to go to Heather. You have some thoughts about this.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, as you may recall, this year in the legislature, they fundamentally changed the formula
Yeah.
to make it more reliant, or actually to give more credit, if you will, to communities with older housing stock. That's why, on the formula, the city of Burnsville received LGA for the first time in a long time. We understand, we too are uncomfortable with sort of a long-term reliance. However, given that this is a formulaic program, we felt that we could manage up to the 50,000. I think at one
That
point
was
in time,
different from before, then.
yeah,
Yeah.
the formula has fundamentally changed.
Okay.
Now, that being said, I mean, we didn't want to go too high on this, and we sensed your discomfort. I think at one point in time, I think early on when we brought this up, we suggested maybe going to 100,000. Anything under 100,000 we'd count on in operations, and you all went, no. So we've come back to you. And if you're still uncomfortable, obviously we will change that. But right now what we're recommending is that 50,000 we thought was a manageable amount as an ongoing operations because it's a formula program. Obviously, if that changes in the future, we will make those adjustments. Right now, the delta, if you will, the 35,000, as Ms. Stry indicated, is something that we've budgeted in the equipment and vehicles fund because that's a one-time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of one-time things. So we kind of have the 50,000 carved out as sort of in the base for operations, and then the extra is transferred into the equipment and vehicles fund. And so that's. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Go ahead.
We don't have it plugged in, but it is one of the solutions to meeting those, that downward fund balance issue in the equipment and vehicle fund.
Let me understand, Heather, then the formula this time for LGA, that we have to put that money into the general fund so that it reduces the property tax, is that part of what they're doing?
Madam Mayor, that's certainly something that has been discussed. There's not a legal requirement that you do that, and so you all could make the decision to have the entire $85,000 for one-time purposes. There's, but that part of the discussion at the legislature, as you all have heard, was that with the increase in local government aid for a number of communities, this isn't a huge increase for.
No, it isn't.
Which is, I think, why one of the reasons why we've got some discomfort with it too. But for communities who received tens of millions of dollars more, there was a clear expectation that that would go to reduce property tax increases. So.
Yeah. Because we always struggle every year with how much the levy is going to be. And if we rely and put this money coming in with LGA and we put it into the general fund, then it goes away, then we have to backfill it with levy increase. So, Mary.
Can we do this on a year-by-year basis? Because at least till we know whether they're...
I just don't trust them.
I don't either. Like they give with one hand and they take it with the other. So,
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sherry, we would absolutely, every year that we bring this to you,
So are you asking this just for this year?
The 50,000
right.
just for this
what
year?
we're counting on. And you had asked us to bring back a policy.
Yeah.
And so this would be our policy, so that would be our starting point for the 2015 budget as well, unless you all change the policy. And so basically what we're saying is we want a fundamental, you all want a balanced budget for 5 years every time we come to you. And that's what we want to bring you. And so this is just, when we were trying to figure out what's in the base, if you will, we put the 50,000 in the base and would assume the others, the rest.
Bill?
Just so we're clear, they're going to plug 50,000 in over the term of the 5 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
We can backfill, essentially undo it next year. But
And
that
we can
will
listen to
change.
what's going on at the legislature, because right now, we received information from one of our lobbyists with regard to the discomfort with giving out LGA and then looking at higher levies. But they don't take into consideration what we do here in Burnsville. It's because of the decertification of TIF district, and we're moving the capacity from one fund into the general fund. And so those kinds of things just make me very uncomfortable, because then the legislature and the governor would go back and say, well, they didn't reduce property taxes with LGA, and we're going to take it away. So
all $85,000 of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're spending too much time on this.
Yeah.
Personally,
Yeah.
I think we're fine with it. I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I understand the proposal.
I'm okay with
Okay,
it with
all right.
50,000, but we put it in a policy. Well, we make the policy,
Just so
and we
I-
can amend the policy.
From year to year. Yeah, that we
I
can
would like
deal
to say
with.
from year to year, we review it. But we'll say we'll put 50,000 in, but year to year we'll review it as we continue to listen to the legislature and the governor, so we're not caught.
I think, Madam Mayor, council members, as Councilmember Coughlin mentioned, we do have it in the base for 5 years, that amount.
Yes.
But if something changes, we would absolutely, every year we review all of the financial policies, and so we can make an adjustment in the future.
Okay.
And the language in the policy uses the words up to 50,000, so it actually just
Okay.
It gives
Up to makes me more comfortable, because it might not be.
it provides some
Zero.
flexibility. It's saying you don't want to do it beyond the 50,000.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're not committing too much of the current year's budget to it.
Okay. Okay.
And then the last item on the financial management plan, proposed amendments would be just some language on the capital projects funds, refinement of that language to fit the needs of those funds. So, any other questions on that? On what we've talked about? Just to reiterate, we're looking at next week, December 3rd, as the budget adoption at the regular council meeting at 6:30 p.m. The virtual budget open house is still available online at burnsville.org/budget. So, and there is also a place to comment, for the public to comment on that as well. And with that, we have some questions. We covered
that one.
We covered the questions, the first few questions here at the last meeting. Heather, do you want to take all of the questions?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we will go buzz through these first questions. As you see, the first one is tax levy. We already talked about that, and we've just noted on this slide. I'm not going to read the whole slide to you for the ones that we've already done. This reflects what the council's decision was. The next piece is the 5-year financial plan that gives a sense of what the tax levies may be in the future, with the caveat that we will always seek to find efficiencies. The discussion items for the finding the funding for MVN, you all were comfortable with that approach. The next one I'm going to pause on just for a second. This was the discussion about the proactive property maintenance and rental licensing program revenues. I want to be very clear that when we talked about there being some subsidy, it was on the smaller portion of that joint program, which is the proactive property maintenance. And so that's just actually less than a quarter. It's 50% of that subsidy for that particular program, but that is less than a quarter of that entire program, and so it's less than $50,000. So I wanted to make sure that was clear because I believe there was some confusion on that point. So apologize for the confusion. The next slide is the fund balance uses, which you all seemed comfortable with. So then we're going to go into our new questions, unless there is any question on the earlier responses. So. The first piece is the capital improvements plans, and this has an aggressive approach, as we've talked about in previous meetings about street and utility maintenance, and wanted to make sure that you are all still comfortable with a significant commitment to increase our funding for infrastructure.
Yeah. Everybody? Yes.
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 Okay. See, nodding heads, 5-0.
Yeah.
The next item is capital improvement plan. It does not include any funding for Highway 13 pedestrian bridges at this point in time. I think from the previous discussion, it sounded like you all wanted us to bring back some additional information in a work
That's
session
right. Yes.
for possible inclusion in 5 years from now.
Okay.
Okay. The next one, fees and charges. You all had a lot of pages, and we didn't go through those in any detail, but wanted to make sure that you were comfortable with the fees and charges that were proposed in your materials.
Bill?
I always like that word comfortable. I see it as reasonably necessary. Am I comfortable anytime we raise any fees? No, but I see it as reasonably necessary based on what we discussed tonight and the application of those fees.
Okay.
Other
Everybody?
council members?
Yes. It's necessary. We have some things that we have to maintain and replace, and most fees are no change or according to policy at the upper quartile.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one, and this is specific to the utility fees. And this is the utility fees that were reflected an increase of 4.5% for water and sanitary sewer, and no increases for stormwater, sidewalking, and street utility. Do you
Everybody? Yeah. Everybody is okay with it?
same
Yeah.
as
Everyone's
necessary
okay.
increases for the one, and supportive of the reasonably necessary for the one fee increase, and then the rest
The
of
common
them?
sense ones.
I'm very comfortable with the no increase in the
Yeah.
stormwater.
You're comfortable, Bill.
Yeah.
We know
Yeah.
Thank you.
There is a use
I
for
would-
that word.
Yeah.
Okay. The next one is the Parks Capital Fund question. The 5 years of plan for the Parks Capital Fund includes an annual increase to try and get at some of our deferred maintenance in the Parks program, as you heard Director Schultz talk
Everybody?
about earlier. So do you agree with continuing the increase that we
Yeah.
had?
We have deferred this for a long time. We're not going to kick this can down the road any longer because our need to be replaced and also maintained. Everybody? Yeah.
Absolutely comfortable with that.
Absolutely.
Now Terry's smiling.
I got
Poor
reasonably
Jerry,
necessary.
how many-
You got
How many years he sits here and we say, oh, well, we're going to defer that.
Money away.
But yeah, so
He's was very
patient
professional and patient and
for so
gentlemanly,
many years.
to take the hit on his budget year after year
Year
after
after
year.
year.
At least in front of us he was. And so I'm glad that we're finally
Yeah.
able to put that back.
Great.
The final question that we have for you, I believe that you have all just answered for us, which is related to the financial management plan and the funding policies, related to both fund balance as well as the operating budget policy related to LGA, that you're comfortable with. Sorry, keep using that word.
Well, I know you're about
That you,
comfortable with
that you all are willing to go with this policy as long as we
we'll go along.
continue
We
to
understand. Yeah.
operate this over the next, or as we continue to review them on a
Fund
daily.
balance is good, it's the LGA, but we'll keep our ear and our eyes open on that one.
Madam Mayor, do you remember how much the LGA cut was back in 2001?
It was 134, because it kept getting reduced. Was it 189?
No, it was 300. We did get,
Well, remember, it kept getting reduced. At one time, it was in the 90s, was 300.
yeah, you might be right. I'm not thinking of the exact number but it
kept
it was
reduced.
we didn't count on it for quite a number of years in a row, and we did receive it. And the year we decided to count on it was the year that they cut it.
Yeah. And then we had to come back
In one fell
next year
swoop.
and backfill it. And I think it was a percent, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a
It was
larger number than
It was
what
a
we're
larger
talking
number
about.
because it was a percent.
I rest my case.
Yeah.
It said up to 300.
Well, but still, it's just, I don't trust them. 50,000 is still 50,000. That's true, yeah.
And the final slide, unless Ms. Stry would like to add something, is really just capturing again our 2014 process, and shows you all of the meetings that you have had to date. We still remain open. There were 206 views on our 260 views of our budget video. No comments
No
yet,
comment?
so we're happy to
But
receive.
a lot of
That was a good
views.
video. I thought
That
it
is
was
really
very well
good.
done.
And then our next and final meeting on the budget will be December 3rd.
Next week?
So.
Okay.
But the records show that we take budgeting very, very seriously.
Yes. When you have, when you look at how many meetings, how many months we've been doing this since June, so 5 months and all these meetings.
Spend half the
yeah, and
year
I'd
planning the next year.
I'd like to comment on the process. I mean, I think that it is very thorough. I think that a number of our citizens watch this carefully, and you make it clear and understandable. And the document itself is very readable. It's easy to understand, and I would expect that there are people who've actually gone online and taken a look at this. So my compliments to staff. I mean, it really is hard work, but you do your best to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, thank you. There are a lot of people involved all across
know.
the city, so.
One of the things that I've shared with people, and they're just amazed that I said, we have several budget preparers. Can you please tell them how many budget preparers we have? I said they said, how many? I said, well, I think there are more than 10 budget preparers throughout the whole city.
That number is more like 50 probably, people that have input in the different areas. So
Yeah.
it's the numbers you see are really rolled up into much larger numbers. We maintain control of the budget at a much smaller divisions, and so everyone who has a piece of that budget has an input on to where they think that costs and revenues are going to come in based on their specific knowledge of it. So.
And what's interesting to me was that they also asked if the people who were in the unions, our union, and I said, absolutely, they are part of that process because of all of the different departments and how we do things very transparently. And so they're very aware of the money's coming in and the money's going out and how we do work here in Burnsville, which is very different from a lot of other places. Mary.
May I go from commercial to another commercial?
And I just want to
say
say,
this is so important because it really has made a big contribution to our achieving once again, and I don't think publicly we have thanked staff for the AAA bond rating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and that was very well done.
that
And
was
I have to give our city manager kudos because instead of just looking at the agency that we have, she went around And because of her network and the people that she knows, she looked at other rating agencies and brought our finances to them, and we're able to continue to hold that AAA rating. So thank you, Heather, for all
Thank you,
of that.
Madam Mayor. Kelly and her staff did all the work in terms of getting everything together. I talked a lot about it, but they did the lion's share of the work, so thanks to them as well.
And the other is I want to thank our staff for the narrative on the budget, because when I talk to people, I say, you can look at the numbers, but read it. Because when you read it, you will the numbers make sense. But read the narrative, and every year it gets better and better, Kelly. So everybody who writes that narrative.
Again, the departments have a lot of input into that, and not only are they writing it, they're using it to guide their operations throughout the year too. It really does guide all of us as we're making those decisions throughout.
So good. Bill,
Just want to thank you all, and
it's another great process, and look forward to next week. And with that, if there is nothing else to come before the council, and our staff's worked very hard, and we can let everyone go home.
Happy Thanksgiving.
And happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and we stand adjourned. Yes. Oh, and tomorrow for our
Winter lighting. Oh,
winter
thank
lighting
you,
ceremony
Suzanne.
tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Nicollet Commons Park.
And Santa Claus will be there?
And Santa Claus will be there, and there'll be cookies and
cookies and hot
coffee
chocolate.
and hot chocolate and
But it's all complimentary
All
from our
complimentary.
wonderful sponsors, so.
Don't forget about the food show
please come.
donation.
Yes, and bring a
Food show
donation to the food show.
Yeah, and I want to thank our staff for all of the hard work that you all put into this. Terry, your staff, in working with the foundation to make sure that this event goes off smoothly.
That when somebody pulls the
Kelly
switch,
paid
the
the electric
lights
bill,
really
so
go
I think
on.
we're...
Yeah. So very well done. Thank you so much, everyone, and we stand adjourned by acclamation.
That was-